Today we're reviewing an absolute legend. You probably know that Mini Motors basically invented the dual motor electric scooter. Well, this is the biggest, baddest electric scooter they make, and it just broke 2 ESG records. This is the Mini Motors Dualtron X Limited, an 84-volt scooter with the biggest battery we've ever tested, and the most peak power with 13,440 watts. The list goes on and on, but I can sum it up by saying the specs are so impressive, they honestly start to get a little intimidating, even for somebody who's ridden almost everything. In this review, we find out exactly how fast and how far the X Limited can go, but maybe more importantly, answer the question, is it hard to ride a scooter this big? And what's it like to live with such an extreme beast? Along the way, find out why we think this is the best scooter to ride for really, really long distances, and a couple details you should know before buying one that I haven't seen anybody really talk about yet. Stay with us, there is just so much new stuff to check out. So just how big is this battery? 5,040 watt hours sounds like a lot, but here are some quick comparisons to put it into perspective. This battery is equal to 18 Xiaomi M365 batteries, 9 9bot Maxes, or 5 Segway GT1s. We're pretty sure this is the world's biggest electric scooter, and at nearly $7,000 is definitely the most expensive that we've tested. In a minute, we'll find out exactly how much top speed and range you get for $7K, but first, let's check out build quality. This is the most extreme Dualtron ever, so one of the updates we were most excited to see is the brand new EY4 display. The previous EY3 display was easy to read, but it was really starting to look dated. The new display gives you 5 gears, or speed modes. Plus, you can switch into eco mode for longer range and softer throttle response. It shows the temperatures of your motor controllers, the percent battery remaining, battery voltage, plus remaining miles of range, and of course, you can adjust P settings, which I'll touch on later. I love the new low-profile trigger throttle. It's way more comfortable on long rides because it can be set closer to the brake lever. Then there's an app, the first we've seen from Dualtron, and it's one of the better apps we've seen too. It lets you turn on and off eco mode, cruise control, ABS, zero start, turn on lights, set screen brightness, and lock or unlock your scooter, and gives you a graphical user interface for all of your P settings. If you have a phone mount, you can take advantage of the app's dashboard too. There's one accessory bar up top you can mount things to, and one down below that comes fully loaded with a pair of lights in beefy metal housings. By our calculations, the 5 headlights throw about 8,000 lumens down the road. That's the equivalent of about 6 car headlights or 8 really good scooter headlights. And the swag lights are over the top in the typical Dualtron style we know and love. To power all those lights, the X Limited has a whole separate 12-volt, 192 watt-hour battery. Yes, the battery for just the lighting system is bigger than the battery that powers the famous Segway ES2. The switches for the lights feel a little more complicated than they need to be. There are 4 of them, and we'll let the manual explain how they all work, but one of them used to be the eco button, and we kind of missed that. You still get eco mode, but it's up on the dash and now accessed by holding the center button down for a couple seconds. The extra battery also powers these 2 charging ports, and they light up too. Further down the stem is a high-quality steering damper. It bolts on cleanly with just 2 bolts and no added brackets. I love the red heat sinks on the sides of the deck with little air scoops on them, and there's another scoop that channels air through the base of the deck. Just look at this thing. Even parts of the scooter you never see are pretty cool looking. The heat sinks really work too. After 6 back-to-back top speed runs, the motor controllers were still cool. At the front edge of the deck are 2 charge ports on the left side and another one on the right side. So with the one 4-amp charger it comes with, you can fully charge in 12 hours, or in theory, cut that down to about 4 or 5 hours if you get 3 of them. It's typically going to take a lot less time than this, since you're unlikely to ever fully drain such a large battery. We don't usually critique the packing materials as part of the build quality, but in this case, Mini Motors deserves a shout out. The X Limited is shipped on a pallet, in a box, wrapped in plastic, and strapped into a metal cage, so it comes out of the crate looking pristine. And shout out to Voro Motors for having a longer warranty than anybody when it comes to Dualtron scooters. This is especially important when you're buying an expensive scooter. Check this video's description for a link to Voro that supports this channel, and you'll also find a coupon code there for a ridiculously long warranty. And you can enter to win one of 9 scooters we're giving away if we hit 75,000 subscribers or more by year end. So how hard is it to ride a scooter that makes as much peak power as 18.2 9-bot maxes. That was the first big surprise. It wasn't hard to ride at all. In fact, the hardest thing when we got going was sort of nudging all the safety features out of the way. It arrived with safe mode on, so you have to grab the brakes before the throttle will engage. Let's get that turned off. But it was also in kick to start mode, so let's switch to zero start. And the P settings were set to strangely mild, so like usual, let's max those out. Okay, off we go. The X Limited's ride quality is like no other scooter I've ridden, and it's easy to see why. Just look at the shocks next to the normal top-of-the-line adjustable hydraulic shocks. The suspension travel feels endless, and there's more than enough damping. My favorite setting was all the way to the right, and then 3 clicks back out. Then there are the 13-inch diameter tires, 2 inches taller than the tires on the normal B scooters like the Wolf King GT. They do a great job of rolling smoothly over bumps, and at 5 inches wide, they're wider than the front tire on my motorcycle. When you're going fast, it's nice to have something solid to hold onto, and this single stem is as stiff as any dual stem scooter I've tried. There's zero wobble, no funny sounds, and it makes the cockpit of the scooter feel like a safe place to be. Unlike some ultra stiff stems, it doesn't slowly beat your thumbs to death because the smooth suspension keeps the stem from hammering your hands. Oh, and this is awesome, Dualtron handlebars are usually a little too short. The X Limited's handlebar height is 2 inches higher than all of the other Dualtrons we tested, bringing the bars to a perfect height for long rides. The biggest surprise about the X Limited's ride quality was that this thing can really carve corners. I wouldn't call it nimble, but in big sweeping corners, the stability and grip are impressive. The new deck is 5 inches longer than the deck of the X2. By our standard measurement, the X Limited comes out to the same length as a Visette 10 Plus, but because of the shape of the deck, it feels much larger than that, and there are a ton of riding positions you can use, which come in handy on long rides. We also appreciate the new cover Mini Motors added to protect the shock, which comes off to install the optional seat. Okay, so now that we have a place to stand and something to hold on to, what's the power delivery really like? I'm gonna borrow a phrase from Jay Leno here.
The turbos feel like the hand of God just pushing it down the road.
The power is linear and feels endless. Even with 25% of the battery remaining, the scooter just shoves you forward if you ask it to. One difference between the X Limited and the previous version, the Dualtron X2, is you no longer need to double click the throttle to get full power. We tested it and all the power comes through in one pull. The X Limited broke 2 ESG records, including the highest top speed we've ever measured. We did 6 back-to-back speed runs and then averaged the fastest 2 opposite direction runs together to cancel out the effect of headwind or tailwind. On the speedometer, I saw speeds as high as 66 miles per hour, but our pro-grade data logging tools told a different story. Yes, it's still the fastest scooter we ever tested, but not quite as quick as we'd hoped, clocking 61.7 miles per hour on flat ground with a 165-pound rider. The X Limited also shattered the ESG range test record. Starting with a full charge, I rode for 3 hours and 57 minutes straight on the ESG range test course, only stopping for red lights or stop signs. I covered 86.4 miles before it finally cut off. Honestly, I thought riding a super powerful 183-pound scooter for 4 hours straight was gonna kinda suck, but it didn't because it turns out the X Limited is the world's most comfortable stand-up scooter for long distances. I've done 50-mile rides on other scooters that were harder than the 86 miles I did on the X Limited. The remaining range feature on the dash is surprisingly accurate. At the start of the range test, it said I had 83 miles to go. During the ride, I'd periodically add up the miles I covered and the miles it said I had remaining. The highest estimate I got was 89 miles and the lowest was 83. So the estimate was never off by more than 3.5%. But as the saying goes, your mileage may vary. One caveat about having this much range to burn is if you go out and ride for 4 hours at a time on a regular basis, your significant other may become jealous of your ex. The acceleration was surprisingly good considering that the X Limited weighs twice as much as a Dualtron Thunder. Its big, wide tires help it beat the Storm Limited from 0 to 30 miles per hour. In fact, the X Limited beat everything to 30 miles per hour except for the Wolf King GT and the Nami. But as good as it is, 0 to 30 times aren't really what this scooter is all about. There's also no hill the X Limited won't crush, but it doesn't do quite as well here because of its weight, coming in at 6th place of the 111 scooters we've tested. The braking distance from 15 was surprisingly short at 10.7 feet, thanks to the 4-piston nut brakes, keeping pace with top-shelf scooters of less than half its weight. The X Limited took a little more finesse than usual to get the best stopping distance right at the limits, but it's as easy as any when you're just doing normal braking. This is the first Dualtron I can remember where I turned regen braking up rather than turning it down from the standard settings to get more stopping power. Here you can see me cooking off the coating they put on the rotors to prevent rust during shipment when I did the first really hard stop. Not to fear, it was totally normal after the first couple of hard stops. It should come as no surprise that the X Limited is the least portable scooter we've ever tested, and it's not just because it weighs 183 pounds. It's also because the Dualtron X is the only scooter we know of that requires tools if you want to fold it. This is one of those things you should know I mentioned earlier, so carry a 6mm Allen wrench with you just in case. I'm also not sure one person can safely load it into an SUV, even using our favorite one wheel at a time loading technique, but with 2 people, it's no problem. So it goes without saying that you won't be able to park it upstairs unless your building has an elevator. And it's best to use the ramp if you need to push it up onto the sidewalk. Pros of the X Limited include longest range we've ever tested, highest top speed we've tested, best ride quality for long range riding by far, and the best headlights for riding at night. Cons include it's heavy, it's expensive, and it's heavy. Normally this is where I'd compare the X Limited to the closest competitors we've tested. Honestly, there isn't anything we've tested that directly compares to this scooter though. So I'm gonna speculate for a moment about 2 scooters of similar size and weight. There's this thing that costs more than the X Limited and claims to go 62 miles per hour, plus or minus 10%, whatever that means, but comes from a company that for 3 years has not been willing to submit a single scooter to us for testing, and also produces at a very small scale compared to mini motors. And then there's this thing from an even smaller manufacturer. It costs almost twice as much as the X Limited and also claims to go about 62 miles per hour. And back to scooters we've actually tested. The Dualtron Storm Limited is lighter and less expensive than the X Limited, is almost as fast, and has the second longest range we've ever tested at 66.8 miles. But it's definitely not as comfortable as the X Limited for multi-hour rides. The Wolf King GT, as always, is just amazing in terms of both top speed and range per dollar, and has great high-speed stability, but again, the X Limited is just on another level for comfort and goes 57% further. And finally, the Segway GT2 makes this list because, like the X Limited, it's one of the most relaxing scooters to ride at high speed, but the GT2's tested top speed is much lower, as is the range. So who is the X Limited for? Well, some people just have to have the biggest, baddest thing there is, and this scooter will definitely scratch that itch, especially because it's made by maybe the most famous brand in the world for dual motor electric scooters. But on a more practical side, the X Limited has a very clear use case, and it's not about top speed. If you love taking really long rides, or maybe you're a delivery rider, this is hands down the best long-range scooter there is, and not because it has the longest range, but because it's just so comfortable and easy to pile on the miles. I'll confess, I didn't expect to like this scooter as much as I do, but it won me over partially because it made my 4-hour-long range test so easy, but also because it surprised me by being so good at carving corners. Owning an X Limited is a lot like having a motorcycle, but without the bother of getting a motorcycle license or having to work a 6-speed transmission. But if you do get an X Limited, I'd still recommend wearing full motorcycle gear. I'd also recommend checking out this video's description to see how much warranty you get from Voro Motors. Shout out to Melvin and Trina at Voro for hooking us up with the X Limited and answering all of my questions during the week I spent testing. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.